Hello guys, I decided to create a quick video on variable scoping. It's not really in depth, it's just a bit of the basics. To show you, I have two objects. One is an obj init and the other is the player. And with these objects I will show you the three different ways in which you can scope your variables in GameMaker. Alright, so let's get started with the first one. And as it's set up here, you can see that I have an HP and an HP max. Now the HP max is set to 100 and after that the HP is set to HP max. These are both instance variables. An instance variable says something about the object in which it resides. So that's a good rule to keep in mind. It's basically a property of the specific object because the health belongs to the player and the maximum health does as well. So these properties, they say something about the player. Alright, so now I'm going to show you a local variable, which is slightly different. To showcase the difference between a local variable and an instance variable, I have a check for the player's health here. If the player has less than 0 health, the instance will be destroyed. Now, this is added because I need to know if the player's health is below 0 and I'll delete it. So this value is actually important over multiple steps or moments, but some things you'll only need at a specific time and then you can just remove it again, such as input checks. As you can see here, I have the var left and var right, and these check whether the keyboard has the A key pressed or the D key pressed, and if they are released, these values will be 0 and otherwise they will be 1. An X, so if I have the D key pressed, it will be 1 and left will be 0. So 1 minus 0 equals 1. So I'd be moving to the right and otherwise I'd be moving to the left. Apart from that, the next step, this will have to be checked again. It has to be checked every single step. The last step's value of these is not important at all, but for this one it definitely makes a difference, because if in the last step the health was already below 100 and this step it's currently again below 100 and gets even lower, you wouldn't want to reset it again, because if I'd initiated here it would be reset to 100 every step and the player would probably never die. So that would be a problem. Alright, so I hope that explains the difference a bit between these two. Now there's one more type of variable which is called a global variable. And you can use a global variable when it doesn't apply to an object. So as you can see, I have a global.player respawn time and a high score. Now you might think that the player respawn time belongs to the player, but if the player's instance is destroyed, so will be the variable data. So you'll need to save that somewhere else. So the same would apply with a high score. For example, if I store this in the player's object, it would just be gone the next time I start the game, or the player gets destroyed, or whatever. So a good thing to keep in mind is that you need to use this when you have persistent values, or when the object that it would actually belong to for some reason isn't able to store it. For example, because it gets destroyed like the player. Now I summarize these in 3 basic rules. Local variables only apply to the event in which you use them and need to be reset every time that event is called. An instance variable says something about the object in which they are contained, and global variables are either persistent or cannot be included as a property in the original object or whatever object. So you have to keep these in mind, and obviously for some people it may be different. Perhaps you'll want to prefer global variables over instance variables, because in a lot of cases you could probably swap them out, and with local variables opposed to instance or global variables, that one's a lot more clear because there's quite a few differences there. But generally, if the data does not have to carry over, for example, from one event onto the next step or whatever, just use a local variable. And if you need something that is only applying in an object, you can use the instance variable. And if something really needs to be persistent, you have to use a global variable. Or alternatively, you could create an object and make it persistent. That will also do the trick, but I mean, you might as well stick with a global variable, right? So I hope this explained it and cleared it up a bit. Cheers.